Thank you everyone for your time today. I was so pleased to be invited to come and do this, and I'm so excited to talk to you about LSP as an agent for change in an increasingly connected post-pandemic world. I think I might have been slightly optimistic when I said post-pandemic. We are not post-pandemic, but we are in some sort of post-2020 pandemic influenced world. And it's becoming increasingly clear that everything is changing, not just the way we teach, but the way we learn and the way we connect. And so what I really want to talk about today to all of you is how LSP can be part of what makes our world better going forward. That's me, and you've heard plenty about me. I will say that I started my career as a volunteer on an apple orchard working with Mexican migrant workers, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was sent there to teach them English, and I realized very quickly that A, I was not equipped to do it, and B, this was a terrible way to teach people English. And unfortunately, 25 years later, that's still how most people are able to get English instruction, through well-meaning volunteers who have no idea what they're doing. So I've spent the last 25 years in various ways trying to figure out a way to make it better and make it easier for people to get access to the kind of language instruction they need to accomplish their real world goals. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about COVID and what it's done, a little bit about technology. I usually talk all about technology, but I tried to rein it in for this talk. We're going to talk about tasks and how language for specific purposes fits into a task-based framework. I want to give you an example of how we leverage technology for LSP at scale and how we make sure it works. And then I want to save time at the end for questions. So what happened in March of 2020? Well, we use technology to solve a huge problem. And what does that mean? Well, it meant then that everything went online. Weddings went online. That's actually a picture of two of my friends having a Zoom marriage. Medical appointments went online. All instruction went online, and every single job that could be done remotely was done online. And as a result, the world is getting even smaller. Every job that could be done online remotely is now possible to do online. Online learning and instruction exploded, and virtual experiences have become commonplace. It's completely different now than it was 2 years ago. Things that we thought were impossible are now possible. People can live and work in a country that's 8,000 miles away. They can use their language skills in the United States for jobs in other places. We can reach people who didn't have access to instruction, and we are no longer limited by constraints of time and space. The workplace has changed completely. Through the end of 2022, 25% of all professional jobs in North America are going to be remote. 4.5 million people quit their jobs in November of 2021 because people no longer want to do things the way we've always done them. And language and culture are the last real barriers to communication and collaboration. And this presents a huge opportunity for language practitioners, especially for people who work on matters of language for specific purposes, because that's what we're doing. We're preparing people to do all of these jobs from anywhere in any other place. And distance learning is here to stay, despite the fact that many people who had to do emergency distance learning are very unhappy with it. As somebody who's done work in technology-mediated language training for 2 decades, I can tell you that what you did in a Zoom classroom when the whole world got COVID is not good distance learning. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe you're one of the few people who knew what you were doing and put together an amazing program, and every student came to class and people have better outcomes. But in general, what we did there was we were solving for an emergency situation. We can't use what happened as a result of COVID as a blueprint for what to do. But what we can do is leverage the research on distance blended and technology mediated learning that's been going on for decades, so that we can take this new environment where people are having the great resignation, they're living one place and working one place. Immigrants and refugees are moving all over the world, and we can think about how to use distance learning to reach more people and help them get more language skills. Because we know a lot about how to actually leverage technology to solve problems. We have a real opportunity right now to improve access, equity, and inclusion via distance learning. So what we want to do really is use software for what technology can do best, so people can do what humans do best. We don't want to take people away from language teaching. We want to help them do their jobs better using technology. And how do we do that? We use technology to solve a real problem. For example, how do we improve upon the traditional face-to-face learning experience? You want to try to be technology and tool agnostic. You don't want to choose something because it's the newest technology that's available. You want to think about what you can do to improve your instruction and how you can use technology to do that. You want to think about what technology can make better. And what are some things we can do with technology? Well, we can resolve issues of access, which is what this whole conversation up to this point has been about. Schedules, transportation, childcare, physical logistics, those things all go away when we can teach using technology. I love this slide because what we should really be doing is optimizing teacher power, reallocating time for more meaningful tasks. Use technology to differentiate your instruction outside of class so that you in class can work with learners on what they actually need. You can track learner progress. We can offer insights to drive intervention. And you can also improve instruction. Differentiation is something we can do with technology. Personalization, the reduction of the cognitive load, which is super important for language teachers. You can use technology to scaffold content so your learners can get it in a way that's accessible to them. Collaboration, interaction, team building, insights, these are all things that we can do with technology that will improve outcomes for language learners. Now, I probably don't need to tell you all this. There is a massive disconnect between research and practice. There is a ton of research on how to use technology, for example, for language teaching that doesn't get used. And there's a ton of research on how people learn languages that doesn't get used. Learning a language requires acquiring a skill. It's not just studying a content area. If you took a room full of academics, for example, and you put them all together and you asked them, they would very happily spend the rest of their lives arguing over the tiny little thing that one person studied and how it's different from the tiny little thing that someone else studied. However, if you sift through all that noise, what you'll find is that everyone agrees that we need these 4 things for language learning to happen. Learners need access to input. They need real examples of the language they want to use and how to use it. They need opportunities for output. They need opportunities for interaction. They need feedback. Now, the way these are operationalized and how you put them into practice, like we could talk about that all day, and that's not the purpose of this conference or this talk. But knowing that if you're building a language program for specific purposes, you want to have those 4 requirements get met. Now, a pedagogic approach to language instruction that I personally have spent a lot of time working in is task-based language teaching, which is based on the idea that you organize things via tasks rather than via linguistic concepts or functions. And I like tasks for language for specific purposes and for practical language learning, like the kind we need to do now when we have 100,000 Ukrainian refugees coming to the United States, 74,000 Afghan refugees already here, and people in the US getting jobs in other countries. Because if you think about the tasks people need to do, you have a unit that you can use for both course design and assessment. So these are the key methodological principles of task-based language teaching. And the first, and the most important, is to use tasks, not texts, as the unit of analysis. The reason why this is the most important is because what often happens in language for specific purposes programs is you conduct what people would call a needs assessment, and you ask your learners, why are you learning this language? But that's where it stops, and it can't stop there because you don't know what language your learners need until you've analyzed the tasks they need to do and the language that gets produced in those tasks and the artifacts that get used to accomplish those tasks. There's a study that a friend of mine did in graduate school, and I can look for the reference afterwards, but she looked at 6 or 7 Spanish textbooks and at the dialogues that were in those books for how you make restaurant reservations. Then she had 20 people call and make restaurant reservations in Spanish. And what she found was that nobody said anything that was in the textbooks at all. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to you because we don't know. You are not domain experts on the domain that you're teaching. Maybe you are every once in a while, but usually we need to go figure out what happens when someone's doing legal interpretation or medical interpretation. We need to understand how business meetings are opened in the culture of the country that you're preparing people to go do business meetings in. We need to know what OSHA safety manuals say if we're teaching people the English they need to work in a factory. And we won't get that unless we look at the actual materials. The next principle of task-based language teaching, which makes it really well suited to distance learning, is individualized instruction. Learning a language is learning a skill, and you can't teach people a skill like this. Like, this is the worst way to teach adults anything. First of all, you're probably distracted by the beautiful view behind me. You might be thinking about the coffee you're going to have after the break because you weren't allowed to bring it in here with you. What I'm saying just might not be interesting to you, and so you stop paying attention. When that happens when you're teaching a language, your learners get lost. Like, the minute they stop paying attention to what you're saying, everything that happens next is wasted time. They can't catch up to where you left off. They don't have the context for what's going on. But if we can individualize instruction and give people content that's interesting to them and relevant to them that they'll pay attention to, then they learn much faster. The other principles of task-based language teaching include using authentic input, making the input accessible, promoting learning by doing, promoting collaborative learning. And it offers a framework for language for specific purposes that's designed for today's interconnected world. These are 6 peer-reviewed published studies of task-based language teaching that you could rewrite as language for specific purpose papers. Spanish for medical professionals, Spanish for law enforcement safety, Chinese for study abroad, English for allied healthcare jobs, Japanese for studying abroad, Turkish for Syrian refugee parents, English for higher ed in the Netherlands for refugees. You cannot get more specific than that. These are all done within a task-based language teaching framework where they conducted a needs assessment that included analyzing the language that's used for those target tasks. When you do a needs assessment like this, you need to start with who is learning the language. Why are they learning the language? What do they need to do with it? Will they need to read, write, listen, or speak? What tasks do they need to complete? And can we find real examples of the language they will use? And that's the hardest part. And then when you think about task-based assessment, at its most basic, genuine task-based assessment means using the task as the unit of analysis. So people are learning languages not because they want to learn languages. Maybe some of them are, probably all of you were because you're in this room right now. But most people who learn languages are learning languages because they want to do something else. And that's what we have to measure is, can they do something else? So now I'm going to talk about how I've done this, which is using English as the example. But as Ahmet said, my whole goal is to do this at scale. I want to help people get language skills and not just 15 people in a church basement who get sent there from a refugee resettlement committee, but like millions and millions of immigrants, refugees, and speakers of other languages here get the language skills they need for integration. There are 11 million displaced Ukrainians today. There'll probably be more tomorrow. 74,000 Afghan refugees are here or on their way here. Workers in the US without English skills earn 15 to 25% less, even when they have degrees from their home countries. And there are 2 million immigrants in the United States who are either unemployed or underemployed. So there's a huge opportunity to help language speakers of other languages get the skills they need here to transfer what they brought from their home countries to the United States. English is the enabling skill for integration and opportunity, but we reach 4% of our adult English learners. The first time I read that, I thought it was a mistake, but it is not a mistake. And the reasons for this are complex. I can't even go into them. That would be a whole other talk. But I will tell you that one of the reasons for this is that the way we teach language in institutions of higher education is broken. ESL students go to community colleges and they tell them, you have to take a class called Great Paragraphs, and then you can take a class called Greater Paragraphs, and you can stay here in this program for 8 semesters. You know what they're doing for those 8 semesters? Working 2 jobs, trying to help their kids, trying to send money home to their parents. So you know what they do? They don't go there anymore. They don't go to the community college. They don't go to the adult ed programs. They go to work because they can't get English skills and they need to have jobs, which is why my approach has been to approach employers, and I'll get to that in a minute. But traditional approaches to ESL are not meeting the needs of immigrants, refugees, and speakers of other languages at all. There's a readiness gap. In 2022, with few exceptions, the way we teach English is outdated, ineffective, and completely unscalable. Barriers of time and money keep people from getting to class. We teach one-size-fits-all classes with predetermined syllabi, and we teach the wrong things. We teach people the names for animals at the zoo. I talked to someone last week who told me that she was going to teach people how to make a grocery list in English. Can I tell you what you never need to do? Make a grocery list in the language of the country that you're in. When I'm living in a different country where they speak a different language, whether I speak it or not, I make my grocery list in English because I need to read it. Like, that is a horrible thing to teach people. So our goal is removing English as a barrier for immigrants, refugees, and speakers of other languages. This is to give you an idea of what that means. This is a snapshot of the kinds of content that immigrants and refugees need. Things like how to write work emails, phone calls, meetings, and presentations, remote work, negotiation, manufacturing, safety. All of this content comes from real examples of people using English to do these things. More English for pharmacy techs, English for home health aides, customer service, retail customer service, grocery store customer service, early childhood education, commercial driver's licenses. The good news is that there is a wealth of material out here for this. I was actually shocked at how much publicly available material there is on a commercial driver's license. There's a guy, I think his name is Trucker Joe, and he's made so many YouTube videos of himself doing his job, and he explains what he's doing. You see him having interactions. You see the rich language that learners need. A lot of this comes from certifications. Early childhood education. We could do a whole presentation on the need for bilingual childcare workers. Right now, it's very difficult to get a childcare credential in the United States if you don't speak English. And what that means is that our childcare workers are not able to take care of children in the language they hear at home. If we had more bilingual childcare workers, we'd have more bilingual Americans, which would be amazing. Food safety, understanding employee benefits. These are all things that immigrants and refugees need to be able to do in English. I've created pathways for them to get access to that language and content. I mean, this is just one example of how you can take the language in a 1 minute and 29-second video about activity time in preschoolers. And you get things like observational and outdoor and preschool, words that are not the animals at the zoo. Hands-on, kindergarten, lecture-like, researchers. These are just two examples of the types of training materials you would get in an early childhood education pathway in English in the United States. And it's the language that we need our immigrants and refugees, especially ones who have backgrounds in childcare, to be able to get so they can go get those credentials. This is how we do it. This is, Amit mentioned my 10 patents. It's impossible for an individual to do this. So we have an algorithm that lets us take authentic materials and identify the keywords that are most important, figure out how difficult those keywords are based on their frequency in a corpus, generate potential distractors. It's really super cool. It's not the topic of today's talk, but it means that we can personalize instruction so learners can get the English they need at the right time. I want to say something about workplaces, because I told you that we're meeting the needs of 4% of the adult English learners. So like, I cannot just go to adult basic education centers and help them extend their reach. Employers are the ones who are solving this problem. And employers are awesome places for people to teach language for specific purposes classes. Training is tied to real world needs. Lessons are engaging and relevant and motivating. Learners can leverage training during authentic experiences. You can track what they're doing for evaluation. It can be built into workplace training initiatives, and skills are developed rapidly. I have the word English here, but it's any type of skill is developed rapidly when you get to use it. And I don't know if anyone's been paying attention right now, but educational benefits are one way that huge employers are attracting and retaining workers. Like, this is an example of something that the Chipotle CEO said. They have a workplace benefit program where they offer career and college credentials, they offer English upskilling, they offer GED prep. That's one of dozens of employers that are willing to invest in their workforce. I think about helping them with English skills, but if I were a foreign language program or a foreign language department, I would be reaching out to them to help teach their managers how to talk to their workforce. Like, it should not just be one directional. I can just only solve the English problem. And I'm hoping all of you can solve all the other language problems, because I get asked all the time, like, can you teach my managers Burmese? Can you teach them Karen? Can you help my managers understand Spanish so they can talk to the frontline workers? There's huge demand for this right now, and employers will pay for it. Many HR and workforce development leaders are seeing the benefits of doing this, but they don't know where to start. So you can help them. And I have some examples in here of how we've done it in English, just because I thought it would be interesting for this particular audience. Maine Health is the largest employer in the state of Maine, and they have a huge immigrant and refugee population, mostly trapped in environmental service jobs. We helped upskill them with English. And what we're seeing is they're moving into allied healthcare positions. They're also discovering that they have people who are trained midwives from their home countries, pharmacists from their home countries, and they're working cleaning toilets in a hospital. I'm not from Chicago, and it's a beautiful, wonderful city. I've been walking around it for a few days, and I've run into like 4 different hospitals. My guess is that they all have big populations of foreign-born workers who are working in jobs that do not match their skills. And helping think about upskilling them with English or upskilling their colleagues with other languages is like a really logical place for language for specific purposes programs. I have a video actually of one of these workers, which I'm going to show. Here's some data about how much content these learners were interacting with. My video will play. And so there are hundreds of examples of learners that I've worked with over the last year alone that do that. Maine Medical Center has a program that they use, and they have dozens and dozens of workers who are working on the English skills directly related to jobs as customer support, like care support specialists, medical assistants. Having programs in medical translation is amazing, but it doesn't solve the problem of having people be able to advocate for themselves and receive care in the language that they're comfortable with. So by enabling more workers to be bilingual, we're working to solve that problem. Another example that I really like to talk about, because it's really forward thinking, is the University of Maryland. So they did a pilot program, and what they wanted to do was help residential facilities workers get the English skills they needed. I mentioned this very briefly yesterday if you were here. And what we found was that learners got content related to their jobs, related to safety protocols on campus, related to how to do their jobs, making them eligible for promotion and advancement. But what we also found was that learners could then take advantage of tuition benefit programs that were offered on campus. So they had a hidden population of employees who couldn't take advantage of tuition remission and were able to do so once they got English skills. I wanted to see what was going on with this program. I thought this might be interesting for this particular audience. Once they started working with their frontline workers, they realized there were many people across campus who needed help with English, who weren't being served by a traditional English language institute, and who also didn't have access to instruction. So this course here is on research responsibility. What they discovered was that postdocs and PhDs who are coming to do work on campus were going through required training in English, and they weren't understanding what was required for research protocols. And they were running into issues with people not complying with research requirements. So we've helped them build an entire program that helps postdocs and researchers from countries that don't speak English get the English they need to understand research safety and responsibility, which I think is a super cool example of language for specific purposes. But I wanted to see what those learners were doing. So this morning when I was going through these slides again, I looked. These are learners at the University of Maryland. Some of them work in building services. Some of them are graduate students. One of them is in the SAFE Center, which is for victims of human trafficking. And you can see the content they're working on. I like to show this because it lets you see that learners are all working on different things. Somebody's working on the English he needs to do his taxes. Somebody else on renting and buying apartments. Somebody else is working on TOEFL prep. That's one of the graduate students who probably needs to get a specific TOEFL score for some reason. Like, TOEFL prep is language for specific purposes if the TOEFL is keeping you from moving on with your life. I'm encouraging everyone to think about LSP as broadly as possible, because fundamentally, everybody's learning a language to do something else. So the closer we can get to preparing them to do that other thing, the better we're going to do. Another workplace example is Chobani. This is a great example. Chobani, the yogurt factory in upstate New York, has lots of frontline workers who don't speak any English. And they are super hardworking and they need to get promoted. So they did a really small pilot program with us. They tried the local ESL department, bringing teachers in to teach English, didn't work. People can't, after you work 12 hours in a factory, it's really hard to take an English class. What they needed was something they could do at home, something that was mobile friendly, something that they could do on their own time. We showed in a really small 20-person pilot that we could help them get English skills. Every single person who participated in that program got a pay raise. And then, and this is really cool, we went in and did an institutional needs assessment. So we assessed the level of language proficiency of 300 Chobani workers who spoke other languages. And we looked at learners who were very low levels of English proficiency and also proficient learners who were in leadership roles, because we wanted to see what proficiency level do you need to do these jobs? What should we recommend for Chobani when they're thinking through employee development programs? And we ended up building a Chobani 101 program for brand new refugees who were hired, and also a yogurt safety manufacturing program, all using the content at the workplace that learners needed to use to do their jobs. And now we have hundreds of Chobani frontline workers who are getting that content at work. It's being paid for by their employer, and it's going to help them get better jobs. And if anybody can teach an English for Burmese class, then I can recommend Chobani to, because they would like to help their managers and employees be able to communicate with their workers. It doesn't need to be one directional. I wanted to move into some educational examples. I love this program. It's a really small program in Virginia Beach. It's the Newport News Adult Education Program. And they realized the same problem I talked about before, which is that people are not going to community colleges or adult ed programs to get ESL to do something else. So they built a boot camp style program. And I love this because it's competency based. As soon as learners get the English skills they need, they transition into career and credential programs at the local community college for careers in logistics, in IT help desk support, and in allied healthcare, in-demand fields that come with the potential for family sustaining wages. And learners weren't being locked out by test scores that said they weren't ready. They were given the resources they needed to get the English skills that would help them succeed in those programs. I was just at an adult basic education conference presenting on this with the person in charge of the program. This is also cool. I brought out all my coolest language for specific purposes. This might be the best course ever. It's the English that you need to be a ski lift maintenance technician, which, if you're in Lake Tahoe, is a high value job. That is a job that you can get where you can start at one level, you can get promoted, again with family sustaining wages. And there's a wonderful apprenticeship program at Lake Tahoe Community College for ski lift maintenance technicians, but there were no speakers of other languages who were able to access it. So working with the adult education program there, we were able to take the content that you needed to succeed in this apprenticeship program and build an on-ramp for English learners to get those English skills. And you learn really cool stuff if you're learning how to be a ski lift maintenance technician. So now what I wanted to talk about is my other favorite thing. I'm going to talk about all my favorite things. I was actually afraid it wasn't going to work. I was like, can I knit together technology and immigrant integration and access and assessment? So how do we make sure that this works? Because like I said before, it doesn't matter how good your program is if it's not helping people. And we need to make sure that learners are able to actually do what we want them to be able to do. So I like this framework for measuring success. There are other frameworks that you can use. What I like about this is that it actually triangulates different data points. So the single biggest predictor of success in any skill is time on task. If learners are not spending time doing whatever it is they're supposed to be doing, assuming that what they're doing is actually organized in a logical way, they're not going to learn. And what you want to see is both overall engagement and spaced practice rather than massed practice. We're teaching people language for specific purposes, so we want to make sure that their proficiency is improving. And I say that with a caveat. When you have somebody who is a true beginner, you definitely want their language proficiency to get better. If you have somebody who's an intermediate learner, they might be intermediate forever, and that's okay. If they're an intermediate learner with domain expertise, if they've mastered the language in that domain at the intermediate level and they can do their job at the intermediate level, that's awesome. Like, for example, I will probably never be better than a high intermediate in Spanish, despite having spent most of my life studying it, because I just don't care about the grammar that much. So I will never get above that on a proficiency assessment. But I can live and work and give talks like this not as good, and travel and do whatever I need to do in Spanish, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So using proficiency level as a gatekeeper once you get past intermediate, I think is something that we all need to think carefully about, because you can do a lot of things at different levels. And part of this work of situating language for specific purposes in a task-based framework makes you think about the tasks and what level you need to do those tasks. All that being said, you do want to look at proficiency improvement. You want to look at achievement. Have learners mastered the language you've taught them? You want stakeholder feedback. So my stakeholders are learners, their teachers, their employers. And the most important thing is you want to look at evidence of real-world success. Continued education, pay raises, promotions, new job offers, community engagement, and confidence. Those are the things that will tell me whether or not my program is working. So here's some data from like 6,000 learners last year. 92% of them improved their proficiency scores. There was an average score improvement of 16%. It correlates with time on task, and it correlates with achievement test scores. I have achievement test scores from 4,000 of them. They took 27,000 tests, an 80% average. Again, we want to see at least a 75% on those tests, because if you are just guessing on every question, you can get a 50. We've looked at lots and lots of tests over the years. I have some examples in here of the types of content all these learners were working on. I had a lot of retail workers learning English last year. But what I like better than that are the survey data that support this. So all those learners who on average improved their scores 92%, 80% of them, and this was a survey that went out to, like I said, about 5,000 learners, and it had about a 13% response rate, which is pretty good for a survey. 80% of them reported that the platform they were using helped them achieve their career goals. And we asked them how. Things like improved workplace communication, 30% reported pay raises, promotions, and job offers. 24% were more likely to stay in their jobs. Others reported career training, access to career training. And then the integration outcomes were even better. 90% said that the platform helped them with their social goals. And my favorite one here is the ability to help family with schoolwork. I've seen it in every program implementation, whether we're teaching English for careers in allied healthcare, English for early childhood, English for grocery store retail. Those English learners are parents, and they don't want their kids to translate for them. So if we can help them get English skills, they can go talk to their children's teachers. And I get that back all the time. Here's an example, actually. Here's an employee at a fast casual Mediterranean cafe. And I have a video of her, which I'm going to show you. And it doesn't have subtitles either. She improved her English and is actually able now to help her children. Let's see. I like the videos because I like you to hear from language learners themselves as they have the skills to explain why they've learned English and what it's helped them do. So here are just some more examples. I have hundreds of examples of learners who respond to our surveys and say things like, I'm confident to schedule a job interview in person or by telephone, which if you're working in another language is one of the scariest things to do. Having a job interview is super scary, and doing it on the phone is horrible. So when we're thinking about the whole world is interconnected and everybody uses Zoom and we can all do remote work, helping people learn in any language how to do those skills is very important. It helped me improve my communication and speak fluently without many pauses. People can understand me better. Like, these are the reasons people are working on their English skills. I can read faster professional materials. I don't need to use the dictionary. So the point of all of this was to talk about how we can break down barriers to equity and inclusion with LSP. Like I said, I'm doing it with English, but there's an opportunity to do it with a lot of other languages. The United States is an enormous and kind of hopelessly monolingual country. Most Americans will tell you they took 5 years of Spanish and they can't say anything. And we can change that by creating language courses that give them the skills they need to communicate with the people who are already here. And COVID's disruptions have offered a massive opportunity to rethink language teaching. As technology continues to change, we're going to have more opportunities for differentiation and personalization. I mean, imagine speaking to Alexa or Google Voice and practicing before you have to go do a real world interaction. Imagine getting lessons that are designed for exactly what you need to be able to go do right then. We know that pre-task planning time improves outcomes in basically every setting, giving people the language skills they need so they can review the words they need to use to do a task right before they do the task. All of these things are possible with technology. It's going to continue to change the way we work and learn. I mentioned something about data and looking at what learners have done. This is a dashboard. It's awesome, but most teachers won't use it because they're busy being teachers. They're not going to look and see what this said. But imagine if the data that was in that dashboard got pulled out and you could look at something that said, 4 learners got stuck on this lesson using Excel to determine measures of central tendency. You'd actually probably be happy if only 4 of your learners got stuck on that lesson. But nonetheless, you could go find those 4 learners and help them. Or there are 3 questions in your online classroom about the difference between LinkedIn and Indeed.com. You could go right away and help those learners. 13 out of 14 learners uploaded video walkthroughs of their portfolios. Contact Sasha here to see what happened to hers. Like, this is what I hope we're going to be able to give teachers so that they can use what happens in outside of class interactive programs to drive in-class engagement. And thinking about how to use those for language for specific purposes is going to help move the needle on creating a less monolingual United States. Because we want to use technology to solve real problems, reach more learners, remove barriers to access, individualize instruction, measure progress and outcomes. Like, any course you build, figure out what your metrics for success are and put in a tool that helps you measure it at the end. You shouldn't do extra work to do this. But if you design your courses knowing what you want people to achieve at the end of them, then you'll have that data and you'll have awesome material to present. And then you can optimize learning for competency-based models. All right, because we want to teach the right things. I think I have 10 minutes left, but I'm almost done because I want to answer questions that I hope you have. Flexible, data-driven, competency-based models. I say these same words over and over and over again, but they're really, really important, and language lends itself to them. They will promote flexible assessment, stackable credentials, integrated working and learning. Investing in language skills not only prepares our workforce for the jobs of the future, which are going to be distributed around the globe, regardless of where we all live, it's going to help improve workplace productivity, confidence, engagement, and language skills are critical for immigrant integration as well as global diversity, equity, and inclusion. I said at the beginning that language and culture are really the last barriers. You could be listening to a speech right now by somebody in any country in the world, and you will. We're going to stop having people fly all over the place to be in person, as nice as it is to be in person. And you'll be able to talk to experts all over the place. And the only thing keeping that from happening will be language. And so it's incumbent on all of us as language researchers and practitioners and the people thinking about practical language skills to think about how we can influence that. That's what I had prepared. And I really hope that there are questions.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. You are preaching to the choir here. I teach Spanish for veterinarians in both rural, and now I have a grant from PetSmart to create curriculum for small animal veterinarians who need to learn Spanish.
That's
so
so
I'm
cool.
so excited about this technology, but what are the steps to access that? Like, how do I get there? What is your advice?
So that's a complicated question, because to get like there with what I was showing you, I had to raise millions of dollars from venture investors and spend 10 years designing patents. That does not mean that you cannot use existing technology to differentiate instruction for your students. So there are all kinds of tools you can use to make videos, for example, available to learners and have them access videos at different speeds, at different times. You can go through with different online tools and pull out the most important information for the content that you're offering. So I actually put together, I have a resource that explains how you can do this yourself, and I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards and share that with you. Any other questions? Oh, good. All the way at the top of the stairs. We're gonna make people get their steps.
Yeah. Hi, thanks so much. We had an interesting presentation about at the recent conference that was just here a couple of days, or for the last couple of days. And one of the presentations was about Swahili for study abroad as a specific purpose. And I noticed on one of your slides, you had Japanese for study abroad. And I started thinking, well, what exactly does that mean, study abroad as a specific purpose? Is it for academic purposes, or are you, because for me, study abroad is the whole package, is sort of
Yeah,
so general.
it's a great question. And the research that I was citing up there was a Japanese for study abroad. And what they did was they went in and spoke to host families about what happened when they would get new students from the United States, where they had trouble understanding what to do, where they were worried about what was expected of them, where there were language barriers. And they built a program around what learners would need to do when they got there, and also so that they were able to take better advantage of the study abroad opportunity. The research on study abroad, I think, unless it's changed in the last like 6 years, which is probably the last time I looked at it, shows that it's awesome if it's well structured. But if it isn't, then learners don't get a ton out of it. So you imagine all the work that we're doing to send people to go live and work in other countries. We want to make sure that before they get there, we give them every advantage possible. So they're not sad and scared and confused and wondering what's happening in their host families and not able to go out and take advantage of the rich linguistic environment we're putting them into. So that's what that research was about. And my guess is that the Swahili for study abroad would be very similar. It would be, what do learners need to be able to do when they first get here?
First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Welcome.
There's something very intuitively satisfying about, learning by doing. So task-based, learning is the right way to go. But my fear is that is, if we emphasize too much task-based learning, are we opening a door, if the door is already not open, for robots?
I've never actually had anyone ask me that particular question before. And it's super interesting. I don't think so. Like, I think that, are you suggesting that because if we're focusing on tasks rather than, but we can't program robots to do every single task. Robots are here. They're everywhere. They're vacuuming our houses. They're helping us follow directions. They're picking things. They're doing awful jobs that people shouldn't have to do anymore. So what we need to do is think about the tasks that humans will always need to do and make sure that we're preparing everybody to be able to do those tasks. Teaching, for example. Teachers always get so worried about technology because they don't want to be replaced. There's literally zero evidence that a technology mediated solution without teachers works better than a teacher. Teachers are fundamental to instruction. But what happens with teachers is they often spend a lot of time doing a lot of stuff that's super boring and keeps them from doing things that would bring more value to students. Teachers should not be grading worksheets, and they should not give the same worksheet to everyone. They should not be looking through El País trying to find articles and highlighting keywords. Like, let's let the robots do all of that. So teachers can have conversations with students and help them figure out where they need help with grammar, understand what the next step is for them in their language learning journey. Like, we're never going to get rid of some jobs that require humans. So instead of worrying about it, we should lean into it and help people get the jobs that we can use the robots to help support.
Thank you so much for such an informative talk. And it is so motivating as a language teacher to see so many students or immigrants or people who need the language actually are able to use the language at workplace. And not only that, the employers seem to also benefit from all those LSP programs. So my question is, did the employers approach you, or did you send a team to persuade them you need to do that? What are the challenges you have encountered when you have to convince them this will be worth it? And what do you find particularly useful when you?
So that's a great question. Some employers have approached me, but it's because I've been spending years trying to get them to understand that this is important. So you do, the quickest way to do this is to go to a local employer that you know has an issue. Either they cannot recruit talent, they're worried about the Great Resignation. You know they have a large population of immigrant and refugee workers, and suggest that you could help them. And there is a ton of data to you. So I do everything by showing them, like, you have this problem, this is the solution, this is how we're going to know it works, and this is how it's better for your bottom line. Now, I wish that they would do this because it's the right thing to do, but most employers are motivated by profits. But if you can show them, which I do all the time, hey, if you spend a few $100s per learner, you can help your learners get English skills, and all of a sudden you have a huge hidden talent pool of workers that have been here for years that can get into jobs that you can't fill, opening up new jobs for new people. Or, hey, if you invested in this program to help your managers learn to speak the language of the workers they're supporting at the same time, you could actually have a truly collaborative work environment. And the nice thing about doing it with employers is they'll just trust you. Like, once you get them to believe that you know how to help them, they're happy to let you go do it, because what's going to happen is in 6 months, they'll know whether it worked or it didn't work.
And I have to believe that the Great Resignation makes employers a lot more open to this.
It really does.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I wanted to ask you a question because I am in charge of developing a whole medical Spanish program for a medical school. It's my first time after finishing my PhD. I had my thesis on TVLT, and I was wondering if it's okay to have homework that they do on their own on grammar that is not strictly related to the specific purpose of attending or serving the Hispanic population.
Yes. So everybody, it's so funny. Grammar is so polarizing. Like, yes, you need grammar. Like, you can't speak a language without grammar, but you don't need to go through and do a bunch of predetermined grammar homework before you get to whatever it is you want to be able to do. So my recommendation with grammar is to try to have it be as needs-based as possible so that learners are getting grammar support when they need it to be able to accomplish whatever task they're accomplishing. And I think that the program that you're building sounds amazing. And if you would like to follow up offline, I would love to know about how you're doing the work for it, and I'd be happy to chat with you about it.
For sure. Thank you very much.
So what you said about the ESL learners, having these busy lives with several jobs and not being able to keep up with community college courses resonated with me. I'm an ESL instructor and I love it. And I'm very motivated to teach my students practical English. So I'm thinking about task-based jobs my students do and how I could help them. And my question for you is how do I implement specific customized lessons without losing the sense of community in the classroom and group work that I value so much for authentic
Of course.
conversation?
And that's a question I get all the time when I'm preaching about flipped classroom models. I think what works really well in language classes is when learners can work on individualized projects outside of class. I think learner agency is really important. It's not something that often comes up in language teaching. Learners often think, I'm going to go to class and then the teacher will give me English or give me whatever the language is. And it's like, on the first day of class, you should explain that that's not how that's going to work. And that the more they put into it, the more they're going to get out of it. And you want them thinking about, like, what do they need help with in English? When I've done that with ESL classes before, I've had them bring in the letters they need to write or the things they don't understand. And you can have them work on that outside of class, and then also do group activities that rely on something having happened outside of class. So have them work with a partner on something, and one of them is providing whatever the artifact is they're working on. Have them do collaborative writing. I love collaborative writing projects with small groups in ESL or any language class, because one of the issues with writing is that learners need feedback as they're going. And if you're having 3 people work in a Google Doc together, they can all be contributing to the shared document. The teacher can come in and give feedback. You really work on writing as an iterative process, and then they all have something to share afterwards. So there's lots of things you can do. And I'm happy to, if you send me an email, I have resources I can share with you. We're probably out of time. Maybe not.
This session technically goes till 10:15.
Oh, okay.
But if it's over a few minutes earlier, it's not an issue because we have usually wonderful snacks during the break. Another question? Yes, thanks.
Hi, thank you. That was a great talk. Super interesting. I just had a quick question related to the, what's your opinion on how universities in the US are implementing language for specific purposes courses? So a few years back, we could find just a few universities who were offering these courses. Recently, we find more and more universities that are offering, you know, Spanish for medical purposes or Spanish for business, etc. But in my own research, I don't feel like this transition to offering these courses is happening like fast enough. So what's your opinion on this, on how these type of specific courses are being implemented in US universities?
I agree with you that I don't think they're happening fast enough. And I think the solution to getting them to happen faster is for there to be more research, like actual published research on their effectiveness, which is going to mean building them in a way that you can evaluate. So writing an outcomes proposal for your course and then showing that you've met those outcomes, because the same way that employers want to know, does it work before they'll pay for it? Universities want to know, is this going to increase enrollments? Can we use this to get more people to come to our language classes? Can we show that they're able to go do something with those language classes afterwards? So I think doing things like that will lead to more of them. But I also think there's strength in numbers, and that having multiple universities working together on language for specific purposes, where you can pool resources and you can pool research ideas and you can peer review each other's work, will also work. So consortiums of places focused on the same thing. I'll just keep going. I think that rethinking what ESP is or LSP is super important. Like, how many Pashto for specific purposes courses are there? How many people are thinking about the emergency medical needs of recent arrivals and what kind of language skills they need? So thinking about language teaching frameworks that can be responsive to the people who are in the communities, helping healthcare workers get the language they need so that communities of care reflect the communities they serve, I think would help with that too.
No, this is not about my subject, German. Not really a pedagogical question, but really your talk raised a lot of larger issues, societal issues that I'm interested in. And it seems that what you're doing is also part of a larger conversation about the role of vocational education in the country, how vocational schools, community colleges are also not meeting the needs, not training people for the kind of skills they need in the business world that well, actually it is related to German. Sometimes some people look to Germany as a model in this respect.
Yes.
How companies are training workers for the specific skills they need rather than doing it through vocational schools, which always end up being sort of out of touch. Do you see what you're doing as part of that larger effort? Is there some kind of coordination?
I'm trying. So that's the other thing that I go around talking about all the time. People who are skilled through alternate routes and rethinking credentials. Most community colleges, if you look at them, require 4-year degrees for most of their jobs. Now, really, like if we're going to have institutions that offer an associate's degree, then that's probably that should be sufficient for most of the jobs. So talking about rethinking what the qualifications are for jobs is part of that whole Great Resignation, and putting more of an emphasis on getting people into jobs with family sustaining wages that are high value jobs that don't necessarily require a credential is a lot of what I talk about. So yes, I see them all related. There are a bunch of big problems here and we can't solve them in silos.
What do you say to people about expertise in this specific field, right? We get that all the time. You're not a doctor. You can't teach medical. You're not a yogurt safety expert. How did you design that course?
Exactly. So that's why you have to talk to yogurt safety experts. That's why putting together a language for specific purposes course that actually has like a domain analysis associated with it means conducting research, primary research with subject matter experts. You need to make sure that you use as the materials for teaching examples that are authentic. So it's not open to interpretation. It's not the language spin on what needs to happen in a legal interview. It is actual artifacts from a legal interview. And then the language teacher can help understand them. There's a whole integrated education and training model that works for often vocational skills where they bring, it's really big in adult basic education where they're trying to get previously incarcerated populations, historically underserved populations, jobs that are meaningful, and they'll bring them in for like a course in welding, and it'll be an IET model where you'll have like an English language expert helping with the welding expert and they're co-teaching. So you can't not have both sides. You can have them both there in the materials development. You don't need to both be there in the execution, but you need to make sure you're teaching people the wrong thing. And the easiest way to do that is to use actual examples of what you're teaching.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation and for your work. Because centuries ago in Spain, I was teaching Spanish for immigrants, and it was very complicated. So my question would be more practical, like if an employer approached you, they will be willing to help with technology, like providing computers, iPads, and also about the time commitment. Are they allowing some extra time for the workers to participate in the learning?
The answer is it depends. So the technology for sure, and I didn't include it in here, but when I'm talking about this for employers, I point out that 40% of limited English proficiency adults in the US have zero digital literacy skills. The National Skills Coalition issued a report 2 years ago that said that. We need to make sure that people have access to technology, they know how to use it, and we don't overlook them. Because when I used to give a talk like this before COVID, everyone would raise their hand and they say, we can't do this with my students because they don't even have email addresses, which first of all is not true. And second of all, if that's true, that means step one needs to be making sure your students have email addresses. Like, think about what's required for the tasks that need to be accomplished and then make sure you help with all of it. So yes, and we do a lot of work with employers, making sure that they understand the resources and support. Because what I don't want is for an employer to say, here's a language learning program, everybody, here's access to an application, good luck, because that doesn't work. They need support. And when you're talking about groups of learners who've not spent a ton of time in higher education, just logging into an online platform is complicated, but it's not complicated forever. It's complicated for like 5 minutes. And once they see how to do it, then they can go forth and use it for the next, I don't know, 20 years if they want to. So it's just investing in building the wraparound support services into the offering. As far as whether or not employers pay for training, like I'm a huge advocate actually for people getting paid for training at work, apprenticeships, and also giving people credit for language, whether the language is English or something else. Like I'm arguing all the time with programs that are sort of like, well, we don't need to give credit for English. I'm like, well, you give people credit for Spanish and they can't say anything. So these immigrants are actually going to learn English and be able to get jobs. Like, why would you not give them credit? So yes, they should get credit. They should get release time at work. Some employers do a better job than others, but we try to set the bar very high.
So this is going to be our last question.
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. And I have a question specifically about the interaction component of these courses. So when you were explaining the Chobani program, and I was thinking, since it seems that the learners complete the modules at their own pace and time. So that interaction component, does that happen in the workplace, or how does that?
Okay, so that's a great question. And yes, to some extent, and that's why workplaces are such great places for language learning, whatever the language is, because they can interact at work and it's part of what they're actually doing. The platform that I have also has interaction built into it. Those Chobani workers have access to small group classes of other learners at the same proficiency level, working on similar topics that they can access from their phones 24/7. So they can do them before class or after class or whenever, because I have like hundreds of thousands of learners all over the world using this, so I can do that at scale. There are ways to take best practices from having built this like this for smaller groups. But yes, I think in an ideal world, you have some sort of instructor mediated interaction and then real world interaction.
Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome.
Thanks for everything.